for accuracy. Oh, now we're recording. Okay. So Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just highlight some of the risks that still could impact on the actual position for the current financial year. There are still some unknowns that we're waiting for. I think what this report does show is that the budget monitoring system we have in place and the holding of the risk budget as a strategy have prepared us well in terms of where we are at this point in the year. So it's pleasing to see that those control mechanisms are actually working effectively in terms of how we monitor our financial position. There are a number of things that are impacting quite significantly on our position this year, and will continue to do so as we move into next year's budget. Some of these are beyond the control of the council. Examples of that would be in terms of nationally agreed pay awards, and that has a considerable impact on the council's budget position. Some of those pay awards have now been agreed nationally, and we're still waiting to see whether we'll have any additional funding coming through as a result of that. There has been some commitment in terms of teachers' pension costs and teachers' pay costs, and we're waiting for the details around that. So we are at the moment including that expectation within the forecast that you see. In terms of the overspend that's being projected at this stage, we can, of course, if that materialises, and it's important to note it is a projected position, we would need to draw on reserves if that is the position we find ourselves in at the year end. And you'll see that although we're using specific reserves to support this year's budget, those are planned and things that we have put in place in previous years. But to fund the 4 million as well could mean a draw on our general fund reserve, which is not at a huge value. It is at the bottom level of acceptability in terms of the reserves. We are in the bottom quartile across Wales in terms of the level of general fund reserve that we actually hold. So to have to utilise that this year would reduce the resilience of the council from a financial perspective moving forward. So we need to limit that as much as we possibly can. And of course, the greater risk is, of course, moving forward over the next few years with the pressures that we face and the potential funding that we may receive, not being able to match all of those pressures. So fundamental to our forward strategy is the delivery of further cost reductions across the council, and particularly those in line with the Sustainable Powers programme, where we look to limit those costs well into the future to be able to still deliver the services needed of us across the council. Section 7 does pick up on the actions to reduce the deficit, and those actions are now being explored and implemented across all of our services, and that will go some way to pull back the position by the year end. But that is something we'll keep a keen eye on now as we report further through the year. I think it's important to note that the shift in the outturn that we're seeing here, particularly around social services, is not unique to Powys. It is a national issue across Wales and England, where most authorities are seeing that pressure from a social services perspective. So it's something everybody is grappling with in terms of the demand that we see there. So it's important to note that. And although through the budget delivered by the Chancellor in October, there is a commitment to fund public services, that will change our modelling in terms of the funding levels we can expect. But as yet, we do not have any clarity as to what that will actually look like. And furthermore, I think in the budget statement from the Chancellor, the impact of national insurance changes is going to have a significant impact on our own costs, where we are being told there will be support from government to support that, but it will also have a significant impact on the providers of services to the council, and we still need further clarity as to whether we will have to fund that ourselves or whether there will be any further support for that. So there is a considerable level of unknown still as we're looking to set next year's budget over the next couple of months. We should have more clarity when Welsh Government set their budget on the 10th of December, but we are still very much waiting for further news around that. That's all I wanted to pick up on from the report.
Thank you very much, Jane. Right, members, I open it up to the floor. Anybody wish to comment? Nobody yet has put their hand up, so it seems that we're Oh, Councillor Jake Berriman, just in time.
Sorry, no, I do have a number of points, but could you just have a look? I'll try and go through them. A look again at section paragraph 2.3 in the report and how it's written, because it was very confusing to me, Jane, in that it was setting out where we had overspends, and then we were saying that actually that wasn't as bad because of other areas that were drawing on reserves as opposed to not meeting their savings targets. And it was getting very confusing as to what we were overspending and what we were making a saving on and what we were moving somewhere else. It didn't feel very clear. Could you just unpack that and say it differently so it's a bit clearer? That would help, I think.
Jane,
Sorry, I was on mute.
it's okay.
So looking at paragraph 2.3, I think it outlines the service areas that are projecting that overspend. So we talk there about social care, children's services, and some around the cost of borrowing that we've seen an increase due to the interest rates being a little higher than we expected. It isn't talking about a transfer from reserves. What it is saying in terms of coming to that 4 million overspend position, those overspends are actually offset by underspends in other service areas. So we're looking at the whole budget holistically to get us to that forecast position. So at this stage, we are not saying we are necessarily going to take those budgets away, but what we are projecting is based on that forecast and potentially the need for those services not to make all of that spend, it will actually reduce the level of overall deficit and bring us back to that 4 million piece. I don't think.
Are they really underspends though, Jane, is what I'm saying, because it doesn't look like they're underspends, because it goes on to say, but both of these reductions of 500,000 in forecast overspend are due to the allocation from the risk budget. So we just moved money around, and that's why I was asking for clarity. What's an actual saving and what isn't? Because it's very muddled.
It's not a saving. It is about budget that's being spent. So those services would have set some costs at risk. And the strategy for us then is to draw on that risk budget as those costs materialise. So where we're showing underspends in those areas, and those are forecast underspends at this particular point in time, means that the spend allocated against their budget that was allocated is below what we expected at this point of the year in terms of that forecast.
Yes, so they haven't made the efficiencies we'd hoped for, and therefore we're drawing money down from somewhere else.
No, that's not the case.
Okay.
What we're saying is those services are currently underspending against the budget allocated to them.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, you can perhaps in rereading it see my confusion there, but that's helpful. And just in relation then to the risk reserve, the special fund of 32 million there, I see that obviously in the column elsewhere we've got some fairly small identified reserves, and then we've got this big chunk of 32 million, of which we're drawing for various services in adult social care. Would it help us being a bit clearer and breaking that down so that it would be more obvious about what we were putting into that in the future, and therefore what we were likely to be drawing down in the future?
That level of detail is there, and we will share that with Cabinet as you have your budget discussions. It's important to know where all of those reserves are, and they are recorded and reflected in the statement of accounts, so they are available in the public domain as well if anybody wishes to go and look at them in more detail. But absolutely, we need to be clear on what we're holding in those specific reserves.
And sorry, Jane, I'm just going to ask the question I've asked you before, if I may, regarding the 1.3 million overspend by drawing down funding, because as I understand it, we've been using cash to date, and that's changed. But my question is, why hadn't we anticipated that sufficiently far to put it into the budget rather than to have it as an overspend part way through the year, only at Q2?
Okay, so when we set, I think what you're reflecting on is the interest that we're paying on our borrowing. So when we put forward the budget at the beginning of the year, you think we're doing that in December usually of each year. When we looked at the forecast then in terms of interest rates, and those would be at a national UK level, based on government statistics, the Office for Budget Responsibility and our Treasury Management advisors, we had a series of forecasts at that point in time, and we based our budgets on those interest levels that were being predicted at that time. We were then expecting a fall in interest rates nationally. Things change, as we all know, and the level that we're now able to borrow is slightly higher than that we predicted. And as I said, it was predicted nationally. What we're also seeing is, because of the overspends and the utilization of some of those reserves that we're seeing, we're having to take out more borrowing too than we initially anticipated. And of course, there is a cost of interest in terms of that borrowing. The borrowing we would have expected to take out at some time, because we've been holding that borrowing off until we absolutely need to take it. But we were expecting that to be a little way on, where we were hoping that interest rates would fall. And clearly we are in a slightly different position, and I'm afraid even a small percentage change can have a significant impact on our borrowing budget. So that is why we're seeing that current level of overspend. What we will of course do is realign that based on latest projections now as we move forward into the next budget round.
Thank you. And I note that David has said that we'll look again at all capital projects, and we've got a capital report to follow. And Chair, do I assume that we'll have a more detailed conversation regarding Appendix D in the adult social care paper to follow, in which case I'll hold any comments on that till later.
Yeah, because we will, because I presume that's the main point about the finance panel's comments. So yes, can we return? We'll return to that in due course. Councillor Ali Davies, the chair of the finance panel, is with us. Ali, can we wait until current members have?
Yeah,
certainly. Yeah, and you can come back in after if that's okay. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Dorrance, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Thomas and Jane, for the comments on the report. I just want to try and understand the cost reductions a little more firmly. It appears to me that delivery isn't where it was at this point last year, which is disappointing, and the total of unachieved savings at this point in the year is over 60%. Although 44.5% of those are assured, is my reading of that report. I just wonder what internal challenge there is to service areas to keep them focused on delivering the savings that they committed to Cabinet and Council that they could achieve when we set this budget. They gave us assurance that it was achievable. It appears that that might not be the case. And what controls are we using to ensure that services can deliver the savings? There's talk in the report about mitigating action needing to be taken to bring those service areas back on track, and maybe there may be some need for reprofiling or changes within budget columns to ensure that they at least come in on break even. Can I just ask how they'll be reported to Council, what oversight we'll have of those, and where the opportunity to scrutinise and challenge some of those profiling and mitigating actions might be? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the unachieved savings, there is a significant level of challenge across the organisation in terms of that. There is an expectation, as you rightly say, that those savings are delivered in line with what was approved by Council. The commentary provided by each head of service gives you some information, but in terms of being able to understand this fully and get the commitment from services around that delivery, each director has been requested by the chief executive to prepare a report around that delivery of savings to give the level of assurance we're seeking. So that those reports are due later this month. So once we have that, we will be able to share that with Cabinet. In terms of oversight about any realignment or changes in terms of the budget, of course, the environment rules set out within our constitution have to be followed with regard to any changes that services make. So the thresholds in there require that any significant changes have to be approved through Cabinet. So you will have clear oversight of any major changes as a result of those savings being changed.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that, Leader? I think we've just got to be aware as well that we've been making savings for 12 years now, and we're running out of options basically. So it shouldn't come as any surprise really that some of the savings being projected, whereas they should be achievable, that they might be a little more difficult to achieve and might take a little longer than normal.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that absolutely fair comment. Thank you very much. Pete, Councillor Pete Roberts, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'll have some comments on the social services side as well, but I'll leave that to later. I just want to focus on 7.3.
Pete seems to have frozen.
It's not quite a freeze, but it's approval. And I wonder whether you can confirm that anything that comes through where you decide not to approve, then that will also be evaluated as being whether that is a post that actually is required longer term. So actually looking very closely at potentially a reduction in headcount. I'm concerned about agency staff, and I think we have a real challenge there. And we'll come back to it probably in the social care side of things, that we've done really well in reducing agency use in some areas, but we're coming under increased demand in other areas. So I'm pleased to see in there that we're looking to reduce agency staff. I think we should be encouraging all organisations within the council to cut that as much as possible. But I'd also like a little bit of reassurance, I think the public probably would as well, that as we're looking to move forward in this year and into next year, that there is some comprehensive work going on within the back office to ensure that our employment headcount is at the right levels and that there is no duplication, and where jobs can be combined and service delivered, then we are doing that so that we look to increase productivity, because it's very easy to reduce roads maintenance, which the public see, but I think the public would welcome some reassurance that we're not reducing road maintenance whilst growing the central headcount.
Good. Thank you, Pete. Anybody wish to answer those points, Jane?
Yeah, if I may, Chair. Corporate services, obviously all of the corporate services sit within my directorate. And as the Director of Corporate Services, I have challenged all of my services to give me the assurance that staffing levels are appropriate. I think currently the reliance on the services that we offer across the council are critical to moving much of what we're changing forward. We look at every opportunity when we have a change in staff. So if somebody leaves us, we look to see whether there are opportunities to do something different in terms of those posts, making absolutely sure that we need those posts going forward, or if it's something different we need, then we would change those posts to accommodate that. I think the pressure being felt across corporate services is immense. We are having to put some additional resources into some areas. Legal is an example where we're having to bolster that due to the work that the council is requiring of us. So I am assured that all of corporate services are as lean as they potentially can be. We have taken savings out for many, many years across those services and changed the way we do things. And that hasn't always been in line with some of the expectations that the public face. I think in terms of our council tax teams and so on, we've taken lots of those down, and it does eventually have an impact. So we have to be mindful of how far we can go. But inevitably, I think as the council shrinks, then there will be changes across those central services, and we are very mindful of that in any decisions we make now to be sure that they are appropriate for future years as well.
Yeah, can I just add that resource review and allocation, it's a sort of first principle as far as effective management is concerned, and I'd expect that to be happening anyway within any service. And I think if it isn't happening, then we've certainly got some problems in those services.
Thanks for your response, Jane. I wasn't highlighting corporate services as a particular area. I was looking for assurance that when you were monitoring across the board, not just in your service area.
Diane has a hand up. Diane Reynolds, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just to give assurance that that process that Jane was working through and that ongoing service improvement and monitoring of effectiveness of teams it happens all the time. But that's not to say that we shouldn't keep looking, keep making sure that we're using digital transformation effectively, and that once we make that transformation, that we're using those elements that we're taking out as savings as well. But that is an ongoing process, just to give assurance, through the Economic and Growth Directorate.
Sorry, our Director of Education also has his hand up. So, Richard?
Thank you very much. It may be useful just to provide some specific reassurance within education as well. As both Jane and Diane have outlined, we are continually reviewing our staffing structure using the council's workforce analytics, but also in thinking around new structures, not just becoming more financially efficient, but also working towards clearer accountability and lines of responsibility, looking at ways of working where we work in better collaboration across service areas in the council, and in that way sharpen the use of resources into the areas of most need. Of course, making sure we fulfil our statutory responsibilities in the process. Thank you.
No, Diolch, thank you very much. Okay. I see no further hands from Cabinet members wishing to speak. Shall we move to the recommendations from the Finance Panel? Councillor Alan Davis is with us, the Chair of the Finance Panel. Aled. Are you there? Yes, good.
Sorry, I struggled to find my mute buttons.
Yeah.
Good morning, and apologies for the lateness of the recommendations to you. The whole process is quite fraught between Cabinet EMT and getting it through to the reports to Finance Panel, and then our recommendations back to you. So apologies for the lateness of those recommendations, but it's fairly simple. Those recommendations, it's about drawing through some of the commentary from the body of the work into the recommendations to stress the importance. There's been significant shift in the finances of adults and children's. We weren't able to establish when those numbers became reality, which month, which quarter, but it has appeared at the end of the second quarter. There's a budget monitoring process, and I do wonder whether within social services, if it's switched on enough to highlight those as in an earliest possible moment when you're seeing those added pressures being, materializing. And so going forward over the next 2 quarters, it's important that the Cabinet monitors these budgets extremely closely, because they can have a significant impact on the overall position of the council's budgets. And also they will obviously play on into the next financial year. because the trend is only upwards from what my position, from where we can see. So thank you for that opportunity. Apologies, I'm not at my laptop today, but I also must thank Nina and Nina Davis and her team and her directorate and the finance team as well for coming to social finance panel on Friday, and also the relevant portfolio holders. So thank you, and hopefully those recommendations will feed through to the final recommendations here to stress the importance and the impact of these additional costs coming through on the overall finance of the council. Thank you, Leader.
No, thank you very much. So, as I understand it, you're asking, the finance panel is asking that we incorporate the statement in 7.4 into the recommendations.
In some form, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Can I have a comment from Jane, perhaps, as to why that was not done? Is that right, Ali? Is that...
Yes, there's that bit in 7.4. Apologies, I'm not in front of my laptop.
No, that's fine.
But also there's the recommendations contained in the appendix as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that make sure they flow through to the overall recommendation. Thank you.
Does anybody wish to comment on that? It's fairly clear. We have to... David?
I've got no objections to 7.4 being incorporated into the final recommendations. We've had some discussion around this, the 151 officer and myself, and I don't know why it wasn't included in the first instance. Perhaps Jane could throw some light on that, but certainly I hold no objection to that being included in the final recommendations. It makes absolute sense, actually, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree with that. But I'm really interested in other members. Jane, did you want to just come in before I bring members in?
Only to say, it was an action we were considering. We just didn't formalise it, but I'm happy to formalise it in the recommendations. No problem with that at all.
Councillor Pete Roberts, please.
Yeah, I mean, given that's the outcome of the savings and the efficient extra monitoring work, putting it in there just reminds officers perhaps further down the chain that it is something that's expected of them, and gives that little bit more accountability. So I would welcome the observation from finance panel, just to give you a little bit more power, even Jane, when it comes to holding others to account.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Is there any dissent on... Oh, Councillor Sian Cox. Sorry.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just getting a little bit of clarity. So the written recommendations are about incorporating, the recommendation is to incorporate the detail, isn't it, of paragraph 7.4 into the recommendations of the main report. But I think, Councillor Allard, you're also asking for the recommendations made in the Director of Social Services report also to be incorporated in the body of the main report. So I just wanted clarity that we're agreeing to that as well.
That is the case, isn't it, Alid? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Thanks, Sian. Good point. Does anybody have any dissent?
Can we have a discussion on the social services report, because there may be other things that we wish to add into that as well before we accept that? I think we will accept it, but I'd like to have a little bit more explanation from the Director of Social Services, particularly about the questions of timings as to when people became aware of this and the actions that were taken.
Can I just say, before we go on to that Leader, the recommendations in the report from the Director of Social Services, at 10.2 there, but Cabinet agree environments, that's already included in the recommendations, because it specifically mentions that the environments set out in section 5.2 and 5.3 are agreed. So all we need to add there is that Cabinet notes the budget position within social services.
Right. Let's have this discussion around social services, and then I think, Alid, first of all, thank you to you and the finance panel for your observations and a very sensible recommendation, which it sounds to me like the Cabinet and certainly I are happy to accept. But let's have the discussion about social more broadly that Pete and others have asked for. and also answering your questions around when do these overspends become apparent? It can't have been right at the end of Q2, so they must have been building up. So let's have that discussion. Nina, would you like to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to briefly take Cabinet and members of the public through the highlights of the report? Sorry,
Yeah, apologies.
Leader, I'm
Yes,
afraid you're on mute.
the main issues would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. Good morning, Bordal. The purpose of the report in Appendix D is to provide an update on social services spending pressures, both at a national and a local level. The national context draws on information from the Welsh Local Government Association Summary of Social Services Financial Pressures 25-26 and onwards, which is a report that was published a couple of weeks ago in November 2024. So the report outlines the Q2 forecast outturn position. So this is not a realised position, this is a forecast position for social services, both adults and for children for the current financial year. Section 2 of the report sets out the Welsh context and notes the significant pressures for local government across Wales, but also the significant projected in-year pressures across Wales as well, with a projected overspend position, of which social care estimate 40% of the additional in-year pressures that are currently facing Welsh local authorities. The Welsh Local Government note that Association note that additional social care costs are attributed to increasing demand and complexity of need across both adults and children's services. And they forecast that the future financial pressures will continue over future years. So section 2.7 of the report covers the adult social care position. Despite the national trend, adult social care in Powys has delivered a balanced or underspent position over recent years and delivered 100% of its £4.6 million proposed savings last year. Within the finance resource model for the current year, the service held £1.647 million of pressures at risk. So these are pressures that we were forecasting to materialise, but we were holding them at risk. And that's included demographic pressures, Powys Care Homes uplift and hours on for the Croft, which is where we hold our packages of care for domiciliary care. So we've also had cost reductions in the current year of £3.814 million included. So before the beginning of I know Councillor Allard's been asking when these pressures materialise. We were already forecasting when we set the budget that we would be seeing pressures within adult social care. The Q1 outturn report for adult social care was showing a slight deficit position of just over £214,000. But the Q1 report highlighted the risks. So the risks around future pressures in relation to the stability of commissioned providers, particularly in the care home sector, the risk around winter pressures, around demand on home-based care and interim beds, around unmet need in the communities with individuals sat on the Croft, which again is our dom care, and then also concerns about providers and their fee rates and future demography as well. Within the Q1 report, there was also a particular risk to delivery of cost savings highlighted if the hospital discharge pressures being seen at that point continued at the current rate moving through the financial year. The forecast outturn at the end of Q2 for adult social care is a £4.431 million overspend. But if the outstanding sufficient savings and efficiencies are delivered, then the budget position would be just over a £3.018 million deficit, which equates to 3.33% of the annual budget. So this has been a significant change, but it has been one that we've been highlighted and as risk both at the beginning of the year and at Q1 as well. The increase in forecast expenditure is due to increased service demand and pressures in residential and home care services across all service areas, and costs associated with provider stability over and above what was funded in the financial resources model. The report goes into detail about the spend position across the different areas within the service shown in the table, and also I go into detail about the different sections of the social services for adults. I'd just like to draw your attention to a couple of key points. In older people, for example, we've seen a particular pressure around additional bed requirements. We've seen an additional 50 nursing beds materialise this year and 18 residential EMI placements. So EMI, elderly, mentally infirm, so these are our dementia placements. So a significant increase in placements for those. An additional 68 clients are now receiving home care, so our dom care. So we're delivering an extra 1,500 hours of dom care per week to support people to stay at home and supported in their own homes. We've also additional service users in receipt of home care and non-care services within learning disabilities as well. So adult social care expenditure to meet statutory responsibilities has exceeded, and we are now forecasting a deficit position by the end of the year. There has been an increase in demand for statutory services, and also a complexity of need has also been increasing. We've seen 10 more referrals to the hospital discharge team than last year, an increase of approximately 25 more presentations per month at the front door as well. The service experienced increased costs associated with negotiating and securing care home placements and additional one-to-one hours due to the complexity of need of clients as well. We all know in Powys we've got an ageing population and well aware of the demography here in Powys, but we're also seeing that increased complexity of need is outstripping the nursing provision available within the county. And we've had an over-reliance on interim residential placements as well, often to facilitate hospital discharges. Within children's services, there has been in a forecast deficit position over the previous 2 years. Within the current finance resource model for children's services, cost reductions of 2.4 million were proposed and pressures of 3.7 million were held at risk to be funded from the corporate risk budget if they materialised. There's also unachieved savings rolled forward, which meant that the service started the year in a challenging finance position. And just to highlight, with demography held at risk from the 1st of April every year, any new child or young person becoming looked after puts that service into an overspend position and reliant on accessing that risk budget. At Q1, the Children's Services forecast outturn position exceeded the budget by £5.295 million. And the potential impact on placements and high-cost placements was highlighted as a risk in terms of delivery of savings at that point. At Q2, the Children's Services forecast position exceeds the baseline budget by 4.871. However, if the remaining reductions and cost efficiencies are delivered, the forecast overspend is forecast to be 2.745 million, which equates to 8.93% expenditure of the annual base budget. Within children's services, the greatest impact on the forecast budget position is for children looked after placements. So this is new placements for children who've become looked after during the year, but we're also seeing a step up in provision and increasing costs required to meet the complexity of the need of the current cohort as well. And of course, this is set within a national shortage of placements as well for children across the UK. I know that everybody will be well aware of our corporate responsibilities and the duty the local authority has to provide care and support, as we would be expected as any responsible parent. In terms of the numbers of looked after children, we've included that detail within the report, and the numbers are stable. So the placement costs for children are increasing, but the actual number here in Powys, it is quite stable. And we've included a table that shows how for the same or very similar number of children in placements last 12 months ago, the annual cost in September 2023 was 6.7 million. However, for a similar number of children in September 2024, that has increased to £10.1 million. So the service are obviously taking this very seriously, and we're taking appropriate actions to reduce spend as far as possible and improve the forecast deficit position, making sure that we take into consideration the need to deliver on assessed need and our statutory responsibilities. Actions are being taken to ensure officers are held to account for their budget areas and have the tools and support available to them to enable them to do so. Budget rectification plans have been put into place and have been implemented that increase oversight and monitoring and actions to reduce spend. So these budget rectification plans have been overseen by the heads of service and myself. And actions include recruitment freeze, except for essential positions, spend controls, including freeze on non-essential spend. New expenditure on placements is only being approved following sign-off from the 151 officer and myself. We're doing a review of all existing placements, staff training. We're currently looking at reviewing eligibility, maximising external sources of funding, and a review and monitoring of contractual arrangements. As noted earlier in the discussion with Cabinet, delivery of the proposed in-year cost savings will be very critical. And this month we are doing a review of those positions to make sure that we delivering on where the efficiency savings outlined, or if not, mitigating actions and proposals will be brought forward. So pressures that were held at risk within the current finance reserves model have materialised. And the service now requests funding from the risk budget and specific budget reserves to cover some of the projected in-year deficit budget positions. So the pressures materialised include demographic pressures in both children's and adults, with increased placement costs, provider uplifts and market instability. And we've also seen a significant reduction in the backlog of people waiting for dom care and home care. So the resource implications are set out with a request for environment within the report as well. So the details are set out in section 4 for both adults and children in terms of the environments from the risk budget, but also for adult social care, 948,000 from a specific adult social care reserves as well. So we've also, a Cabinet queried earlier how this will be overseen. We will be reporting regularly to corporate leadership team and bringing monthly reports to Cabinet as well. So I wanted to outline that to you at this point as well. Leader, is that okay if I pause there, and happy to take any comments and questions?
That's absolutely fine. And many thanks both for your presentation and also for the very, very detailed reports that we have before us. There's a lot of work gone into that, and I know, and we all recognise the pressure under which you and your staff are working. So many thanks for everything that you are doing to try and matters. Do members have any questions of Nina at this point? His report is very clear, particularly taken with the comments made by the Director of Corporate Services that when we set the budget, that these increased demand pressures were anticipated and held at risk, and now the risk has been realised, and I think that's a very fair observation. Councillor Jackie Charlton, please.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Nina, for this really detailed report and for all the work that's gone in. I know the leader has already thanked you for that, but I don't think we can thank you enough really for this, knowing that the pressure that everyone's been under over the last month or so, trying to understand what's going on here. You did allude to this, but I'm just wondering whether you might be able to give a little bit more background on it. There is a WLGA paper which actually clearly states that this is not a single authority problem. This is happening across Wales and probably happening across the whole of the UK at the moment. So all social services are under pressure. But are we doing any benchmarking to see whether we're doing better or worse than other local authorities, or what those pressures might actually come to as we go through the rest of the financial year? Do we expect this to continue to rise? Or do we feel that this is a peak we've achieved, or not achieved, but we've come to at this point?
Good questions, Nina.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jackie. As you said, the WLGA paper really sets out some key information from across Wales, and it's a useful kind of partly of a benchmarking. I'm having conversations with directors of social services across Wales, and it's a very challenging position everywhere, with many in very similar budget kind of deficit positions, and some more challenging as well. For some of those local authorities, they've been in overspend deficit positions for a number of years in social services as well. Whereas, as I set out, adult social care, for example, in Powys has been delivering slightly on budget or under budget for the last couple of years. So I'm a member of the Association of Directors of Social Services, and we're very much looking at this at the moment together. We're escalating our concerns to Welsh Government, to officers, and we've got a meeting in the next couple of weeks, meeting as directors to discuss the current position, but also the work that we're all doing within our individual local authorities to address the current challenges across social services, and if there's any information, learning and lessons to be learned across local authorities. So just to give you assurance that I'm looking to share information with other local authorities and any learning as well that I can bring back here to Powys as well. So that is ongoing. I think it's a really good question about whether it's going to continue to rise. Obviously, I've set out in the report the mitigations and spend control actions that we have implemented already across social services, and we'll be monitoring those monthly to monitor the impact. But of course, there is risk. We're heading into winter, we're heading into flu season, so there is a risk that there could be increased pressures materialising over the coming weeks and months as we go into winter, etc. These are demand-led services, and we profile and we forecast, and as I said, we forecast these pressures, but there's also an unknown as well. And within children's services, for example, we don't know what we've got people working in the community, etc., and we'll do all we can to support families and children to stay safe at home. But you don't know when something could come. So it's a really good question, Councillor Jackie. I'm confident of where I think we are so far, that we will certainly do our very best to stop it increasing further, but that does come with a risk, because we do have a lot of unknowns at this point of the year, particularly around flu and winter pressures coming forward as well. But we'll be coming to you monthly as a cabinet, and I can keep you updated on that as we move forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Richard. Councillor Richard Church, please.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to highlight the Director of Social Services reference to the very sharp increase in the cost of children that we need to place into care, from 6 million to 10 million a year. That increase alone is equivalent to more than the cost of many other services that we provide within the council. And anybody who was listening to Radio 4 this morning will have heard quite a lot of coverage of this. It's a nationwide problem across England and Wales, and it's not entirely demographic, because the number of young people who we need to put into care has remained fairly static, but the complexity of their needs has increased, and the cost of these homes has substantially increased. And I think it's something which needs to be highlighted because of the huge impact that it has upon this council and indeed upon the young people concerned. And I just wonder whether Nina could tell us how much choice we have in this, in terms of where we are able to send these young people to, because we know that we may be sending them to homes who make a very considerable profit out of this work, and we have very little alternative as to where we send them.
Thank you, Richard. Really good point. Nina, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Richard, for your comments. As you absolutely state, this is a national problem, a national challenge. And, even over the weekend, the last couple of days, there's been multiple news releases and discussions about it. It really is very, very topical at the moment. Thank you for noting the huge increase in the placement costs, etc. I would just like to highlight here the really excellent work that children's services are doing, because our children looked after numbers are static. That's not the case everywhere, but the teams are doing excellent work to support families and young people across the county and keep children safe wherever possible at home. So I just want to kind of note the good work that the children's services team are doing. In terms of choice of placements, it's very limited and sometimes no choice, Councillor Richard. Often that we are, along with local authorities across the council, we're all going for very limited or number of placements, and we have very limited or no choice to where we can place our young people. But we make sure that we're doing the searches, we're really thorough, we evidence all the work that we're doing and can justify the placements, etc. And we have, head of service making those decisions as well in terms of placements appropriateness, and making sure that wherever possible, if there is choice, that we're getting the most value for money placements as well, making sure, of course, that they are appropriate to meet the needs of the young person. So yeah, no, very challenging. Thank you, Councillor Richard.
Good, thank you, Nina. Councillor Pete Roberts, please.
Yeah, I'm going to phrase what I say very carefully, because these are two very sensitive matters, and thankfully they appear in 2.24 and 2.5 right next to each other, even though one relates to adult social care and one children's services. There is rightly a push coming through to free up hospital beds in order to reduce waiting lists, which will have a long-term benefit by catching conditions earlier, but that is pushing quite significant additional demand onto our services. So my question around the adult social care is, have we actually quantified the amount of cost that is being pushed on, and how much this push out of the NHS and into the adult social care budget, how much of that is contributing to the overspend within that service area? And what discussions we are having with our colleagues elsewhere within government as to how this might be mitigated. And then in children's services, I note here a transfer of 0.3 million from the risk budget at the end of 23/4 in relation to USC placements. And I know we're holding level on children looked after, but I know on previous documents that has been a decline within our resident population and an increase in UASC placements in order to support central government requirements there. Now, we all know that the presence of UASC children here is something that we should be absolutely supporting, but it also represents a failure of the previous government to actually deal with that system appropriately. And we also know that there are huge, complex, particularly traumatic needs within that sector. So I'm wondering whether we have had discussions with the Home Office in terms of the level of support that they are giving to local authorities in that area, so that the costs that we are incurring are better reflected in the finance that is being supplied by government.
Thank you, Pete. For those listening who don't know what UASC children are, unaccompanied asylum seeker children is what that acronym refers to. Nina.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pete. As you say, the report does reference, the importance and the focus that is being put on by Welsh Government in terms of prioritisation of hospital discharges, and that does undoubtedly have an impact on social services capacity and finance. I can't quantify for you here today, I'm afraid, but there is additional work around the Care Action Committee, the 10 Best Things, 50-day challenge, etc. So all of that does come with implications on social care. And, as we all know, hospital discharges and the health and social care sector, it's one system, and we need to make sure that we're working together, isn't it, to first of all, try and reduce the number of people going into the front door of hospitals in the first place. And then once people are there, to get them home or into the most appropriate setting as soon as possible. So, absolutely want to assure that, we understand and support the importance of that work, but it does have an implication on social services in terms of capacity. Absolutely right. In terms of what we're doing about that, Association of Directors of Social Services in Wales are meeting regularly with Welsh Government, and I know there's another meeting I think it's in the next fortnight, where we are discussing in particular those kind of issues and concerns that we have with Welsh Government as well. So just to give you in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children placements, yeah, Councillor Peat has had, we want to welcome these young people. Really, really important that we play our part in that as well. I had any myself, but I believe they are happening at a national level, but I'm afraid I'd have to go away and bring that detail back to you, Councillor Peat. I don't have it here with me today, but I know those conversations, I'm pretty sure they have been happening about ensuring that the costs are better reflect the reality in terms of supporting these young people. So thank you for raising those issues. Thank you, Councillor Peat.
Good. Thank you very much. All right. Councillor Sandra Davies, please, and then Councillor Jake Berriman.
Diolch yn fawr, bore da pawb. I would like to say a number of thank yous to the officers and to the councillors who've already spoken on this topic, and thank you to Nina for the report that has been presented to us today. And I just wanted to assure everybody who is listening that everything in the power of our officers is being made to try and mitigate the escalating costs. Unfortunately, the placement costs, which are outside of Powys County Council, are exorbitant, as we've seen, and we do not have any control over those. And it is a national issue. It comes down to supply and demand. There is high demand and low supply, and we know what happens with costs then. They've gone through the roof, and that's what's happened. And we have no control over that whatsoever. I just want to reassure everyone as well regarding our agency staff, particularly in children's services. This has been going on for a number of years, before I became a councillor even, before I became a cabinet member, but that work has continued. It does take time. Any change takes time. And when it's made, sometimes it might not sound palatable, but then once that change starts and progresses and does draw fruit, it becomes valid and more beneficial for all concerned. And with regards to our agency staff, our numbers have reduced from 57 down to 15 today, I'm believing. And I had a really good report and talk with the head of service this morning regarding our agency staff. I think there are 3 individuals within our agency staff who are applying to become more permanent in Powys. So this is filtering through continually. So it shows that Powys is doing something right. We've turned the corner from the bad reports and the bad processes that were happening in 2017. We cannot afford to go back there. We're in quite a good place, despite the costs that are involved. Our staff are working as a team and pulling tremendously together. And that shows because we've got a number of welfare officers who are also been with us for about 20 years or so, but they've got the grassroots knowledge and experience of what is happening on the ground, and they're feeding that through so that we're getting the right information as soon as possible. Our open door facility, the numbers there are increasing. And we know that there are lots and lots of problems and issues out there in the big wide world. We only have to turn on the media and see. It's depressing. We see wars, we see conflict, we see strife, we see hardship, cost of living, etc., etc. This does affect everybody, and it affects households. And when it becomes pertinent to individuals, the most vulnerable are the most affected, are the most needy, and they are our children. And when anything happens to any of our children, we as corporate parents have a duty of care. And that's what our staff have foremost in their minds. Unfortunately, if something happens to any child at any time, the teams rally in and provide that support. Unfortunately, we may not have the money to do that, but that's human nature as well. We as individuals would do all in our power to help and support a young child if we saw them in need. We wouldn't think of the consequences or the costs. We would go in and try and support and help. And then we would think after, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to provide? But it's really important that our staff continue on this path. We are doing the right thing. We are talking to the right people. We are trying to address it. And we have to stamp out the profiteering that is being made in the private sector when it comes to provision of children. I hope that reassures everybody. Our staff are pulling together. We are very conscientious of the costs. Nobody likes to see increasing costs, but safety is paramount for each and everyone. Diolch yn fawr.
Reason went on to mute. My apologies. Thank you, Sandra. I'll bring in Councillor Jake Berryman, and then I think we'll try and wrap this up if we may. And we need to have a discussion as to how we incorporate the recommendations from Finance Panel into the recommendations we're noting today. So, Jake.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. You absolutely had me there, and until you did say that we wouldn't give any consequence to the cost, and that's the bit that I do get worried about, and I don't take assurance on. Bearing in mind we've moved a considerable way since Q1 to Q2 in terms of the running up of an additional bill, and I am more assured about some of the steps that are being put in place to control that. And the reason it matters, Sandra, is of course, whilst you're looking after 235 children, and we can see the number of beds associated with the rising cost, etc. And these are real things, real people suffering real hardship and in real need. There are many thousands of people right across Powys who have services from us all the time, a whole range of services. And what is having to happen is we're having to turn the tap off on those services as we address the budgets that we're talking about. £100 million, a third of a budget going into that social care budget. So I think we have to be very careful about just saying, well, we'll spend first and think about it afterwards, because these are big amounts of money, which has already been said. They're bigger than, by Councillor Richard, bigger than whole spend areas for very valuable, highly praised services elsewhere. So we have to be really careful about that. But I do accept what you're saying there, that everything is being done by officers within their power. And I know from what's being said, and we've discussed before, there are extensive reviews, and that's right across the council. So it isn't just in these areas. A lot of work is going on elsewhere. And I suppose it brings me to the point, if we're doing everything we possibly can, and other local authorities are replicating that, and we do see it. I've been reading right across the country, councils going bankrupt, 1 in 4 councils, unitary authorities in England potentially going bankrupt, serving a Section 114 notice on the back of social care costs. And I therefore find it somewhat disappointing when I look at budget announcements about the additional money going into health and the lack of money really going into social care. It was said by Nina, this is a national problem, this is a national challenge, and yet we're demanding increased council tax, which is a really regressive tax, in order to pay for these things locally. So I do feel we're sort of isolated here, and I take heart from what Nina's saying about all social directors are sharing ideas, and they're doing that, and indeed that they are addressing this with local government in Cardiff as well, trying to highlight this. But I want to know, not from you necessarily, Sandra, from anyone here, what we do additional to that, to say, look, this isn't something that we can resolve any longer, because the budgets that we're talking about here will very quickly, within the next 6 months, within the next year, within the next 2 years, eat up and take away the remaining budget that we have for all of their other services. In 10 years' time, we might be doing nothing other than social care and education, and that'd be really worrying and distressing to me. So what more can we do to ensure that when national governments prescribe and regulate statutory services at a certain level, and you've all highlighted that, Sandra and Nina there, that we actually get paid the right amount of money to do that, whether it's children coming from abroad and we're having to look after them, whether it's them, or people being placed somewhere, if we're being asked to do it at a certain level, we really ought to be paid for it. And so how are we taking that challenge? I understand Nina's going back and debating. I understand the Welsh Local Government Association is going back and debating. And I really value this report because it shines a light on this real problem, which is crippling local government. Let's face it, this is the problem that is crippling local government. So how, as Powys Council, are we going to go back to the government and say, look, we really need a fair settlement? It may be, Jane, that you're doing that already. James, you might be doing that, but perhaps use this opportunity to explain that to the to Cabinet, because I think we really need to double down on that effort, because we can't keep shifting the resource within the council wholly into this area at the demise of everything else. So I thank you for that, but I do get a little bit worried, Sandra, about your observation there.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Some really good points, and in terms of the efforts that are being made to make central government aware of the problems, I did note that this announcements this week by ministers that there will be legislation to try and address the issue of the apparent profiteering by private care providers who basically have local government over a barrel when it comes to accommodating these young people with incredibly complex needs. And whether, obviously legislation takes a long time to get through Parliament, and how effective it will be remains to be seen. But clearly there is a recognition at national government, at UK government level, and I'm sure at Welsh government level, of that particular issue. And I'm absolutely certain that the lobbying is intense between the WLGA and the Welsh government and on up the M4 to Whitehall. But just to say to members who might not know, that there is a budget seminar this Thursday in the Metropole, the Welsh Local Government Association holding budget seminar on local government finance for the coming financial year, and no doubt this particular issue will feature very heavily in those discussions, and Welsh government officials will be there. So I'm not sure there's much else we can do except keep banging at the door, which we do with great frequency. It is extraordinary that it has taken this long, to the point where large areas of local government are in danger, as you say, of going effectively bankrupt because of this issue, for actually this recognition of this problem to filter through onto the front pages of the media and achieve a relatively high political profile, particularly at Westminster. But it is just the way it is, and we have to deal with it. And it's a shame that it has taken us, it's got to this point where local authorities are facing this financial challenge for recognition to have occurred. But there we are. But no doubt the challenges have got greater, and I think the damage that COVID did is now becoming more and more apparent. And I don't think we could ignore that. But it's something that local and national government has to face up to. Excuse me. So, having said that, we'll wrap this up. I've now got 3 new hands. Let's bring in the portfolio holder covering under social care, Sian Cox. Thank you, Sian. And then I think Sandra wants to come back on 1 or 2 points you've made, Jake, and then Pete, and then I will ask for us to wrap this up and bring the portfolio holder for finance back in. So thank you, Sian.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I'll be quick. I wanted to come back in on the point around the officers and their daily decision making. So we've got, the services. I'm sure children's services. I shouldn't speak for children's services, but all across social care, we've got professional officers in all of those roles managing risk daily as part of their daily jobs. So we have financial regulation responsibilities, but we also have the statutory duty to meet people's care and support needs, as Councillor Sandra was setting out. So it's a daily constant tension between those financial obligations and managing risk to real human beings, which is what is the daily life of our officers. So of course we do need to account for our spend and review it continuously, and we do that, but we also need to meet people's eligible care and support needs. So I'm confident that all of the spend decisions that have been made were the right ones. And we just need to remember that this is a balance and a tension that officers have to deal with on a daily basis. I concur with James's point. There's, in terms of lobbying for the right amount of resource, the adequate resource to meet these demands, those conversations are ongoing and continuous. We in our different roles meet with Welsh Government ministers in different fora, and that's ongoing, and the pressure is mighty from social care leaders and from local authority leaders in general across Wales, certainly in all the meetings that I go to. There is also the countervailing imperative for us to transform our own systems, and there is work ongoing there, not just the current transformation portfolio that we've got in adult social care, but looking at some really innovative practice that's brought good results in other areas. So we're a little bit early to be giving you detail about that at the moment, but there is significant work being done behind the scenes to expedite that.
Good, thank you, Sian. Councillor Sandra Davies.
Thank you, Leader. I will be brief. Just coming back on one or two points that Councillor Jake has mentioned. I wasn't being flippant when I said about disregard to the budget. That was not meant in any way, shape or form. All our staff are really going to the nth degree to scrutinise our budgets to make sure that we're not overspending, and every effort is made to reduce costs in any way, shape or form that they can do that. But my concern, my real comment, or I'm hoping that everybody pick this up, if a child comes into our service in need, they are accepted, welcomed and treated with respect, dignity and provided with the care that they need. And it is then that we have to go around looking for our budgets. Our budget has been frozen we've been static on our budget for the last 2 years. We know about the cost inflation, the rising costs, etc. But our budget has remained static. Fortunately, our children who looked after, their numbers are also static as you look back into the years past. That shows that the system is working. We are trying to meet the needs of our children at as early a possible date that we can. The earlier that we intervene and support our youngsters means that we are providing the right service and cushioning that so that they do not become in more need as they grow older. So that's the essential bit. We haven't got any figures on those. We haven't got any glass bowls to look into to see how many children are going to come into our service. And that's the issue. That's the balancing act. We accept the children, we look after them, and then we have to look and scrabble for the money. And thankfully, we do get a lot of grants from Welsh Government, but they tend to come in at the 11th hour. And it's very, very difficult then to try and fit those grants with whatever conditions that they've given to accommodate what we are providing. I have spoken with members in the Welsh Government. I have spoken with ministers, and they are very much aware of this. And the good thing is that we have got Welsh Government and Westminster Government of the same colour now. I'm not wishing to be political, but there is an opportunity now where people are of the same mind and are having the forefront, the saving of our youngsters. And I'm thinking that now we will see a turn in the tide. And as far as our service in Powys is concerned, our service has turned the tide. We are being static in our numbers. We are keeping a close eye on our youngsters and providing the service as and when is needed. The cost we haven't got control over when people are charging and privatising and taking exorbitant prices on almost vulnerable. That's sinful. That needs to be stamped out. And people, Westminster and in Wales, they all know that has to be stopped. And there are things now beginning to take place. Hopefully that will peter through. We need it stamped out yesterday, not tomorrow. I'm hoping that makes a little bit more reassurance to what my comments were, Councillor Jake, rather than what I'd said previously. I didn't want to mislead. Thank you.
No, many thanks, Sandra. I'm sure we did fully understand the point you're making. So don't worry. Pete and Jake, I'm not going to allow you to come back in. I'm sorry. I'm going to wrap this up. We've been at this a long time. Pete, and then bring the portfolio back in and just to put the recommendations to the Cabinet. Thank you.
Just to give Jake a little bit more reassurance about what we are doing, myself and other portfolio holders in education were quite clear to the Minister in our pre-Welsh budget meeting with her that there are significant challenges coming through around additional ALN costs, which has an impact on children's services, and a number of other priorities of Welsh Government in terms of how that feeds through into unintentional costs on schools' delegated budgets. So there is lobbying going on. I hope that will materialise in additional support coming to the education budget in early December, and that will filter through to us. But we're not sitting back and doing nothing. We are doing what we can to make the Minister aware and give her clear guidance as to where education is feeling pressure in both an urban and a rural context.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Right, David, back to you. And bearing in mind, we seem to have agreed to incorporate the recommendation from Finance Panel into these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'll look for some guidance from the monitoring officer here, but the way I understand it is that we've got the recommendations in the main report at section 14. We want to add to that the Finance Panel formal request that we include 7.4 in the recommendations, and my understanding was that we wanted to include the recommendations from the Director of Social Services report. The only thing I'd say there is that you've got two recommendations, 10.1 and 10.2, and 10.2 already seems to be covered in 14.3, where the environments referred to are actually at 5.3, and that is included. But I'll be guided by the monitoring officer.
Thank you. Clive.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor David. I would suggest that we add 2 extra recommendations to the report, and that would be a new recommendation, 14.3, that a review of all budget lines be undertaken, and where underspends are already being reported at Appendix A of the report and are unlikely to change, or where income is higher than expected and projected to continue, the Section 151 officer has delegated authority in consultation with the portfolio holder for finance to freeze or align these budgets for the remainder of the financial year within subsequent approval of adjustments in line with the existing environment rules. Leader, I would also suggest that we also add that a further recommendation that Cabinet notes the budget position of social services as set out in Appendix D of the report, and notes the actions to be taken by the service. I suggest that those are the 2 additional recommendations that Council considers, Cabinet considers this morning.
Good. So they would be 14.4 and 14.5.
Correct.
Yes, good. Okay, is everybody clear about what's being proposed? And note that the environments that will have to go to full council, we're approving that those be recommended by Cabinet to council. No doubt there will be further discussion at full council about those substantial environment requests. So those are recommendations. They're clear. Can I have a seconder for those, please? Councillor Sean Cox has seconded. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Grant. Excellent. That's clearly carried. Good. Okay. We've been at this now for an hour and 3/4. I'm sure 1 or 2 people would like to come for break. Would that be okay? Just 5 minutes? And then we'll come back and complete the agenda, hopefully before 1 o'clock. So thank you very much. We have a couple more important items to consider. So thank you. So everybody could reconvene at 11:50, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. Right. Sorry, David. Councillor David, it's you again. Item 6.
Thank you, Leader. This is the capital forecast for 24-25 as at the 30th of September 2024. It's for information purposes only and to be noted, so I'll just give a brief outline of the content of the report. The programme's been updated following the reprofiling of projects and additional grants received from Welsh Government. The revised programme as at 30th of September 2024 is budgeted at £86.36 million, following the successful award of additional grants and the reprofiling of budgets between financial years. Actual spend amounts to £28.27 million, representing 33% of the total budget. And you'll see a breakdown at Table 1 at 2.3. Currently 25%, £21.44 million of capital expenditures budgeted to be financed by borrowing. The interest cost for this is charged to the revenue accounts. Section 2.5, Table 2, demonstrates the capital programme funding. Section 3 lists the grants received. I won't go through those in detail as you already have that information. And Section 4 looks at the reprofiling of budgets across financial years. Services have been asked to review their budgets during Q2 to ensure their allocations in the capital programme accurately reflect their plans for the future. The table included at Section 4 there shows the amounts that have been reprofiled into future years. With regard to capital receipts, £0.42 million has been received to date, which includes £0.28 million received from the housing revenue account. There are currently sales agreed to the value of £5.38 million. These are at the legal stage of the process and will generate future capital receipts. At this stage, it's expected that sales totaling £10 million could be achieved this financial year, but there remains a significant risk to achieve annual target of £10 million capital receipts. At this point, Leader, I'll just hand over to our 151 officer to see if she'd like to add any further comments. Thank you.
Jane, thank you, David.
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing further for me to add at this one.
Good. Thank you. Any questions? Any points or questions? Councillor Jake Berryman, please.
Yeah, just a quick one. I indicated earlier, I'd just make a comment now, and that was in the Q2 finance report, it indicated that there would be a thorough review of capital programme spend going forward. Is that the report I see on the 14th of January, which was the medium-term financial plan and capital, or are we going to have a separate detailed deep dive on that, which is what I sort of assumed we'd probably do? So my question is it that one or is it another one, and when will it be?
I think we're going to have to have a full review of the capital programme going forward, particularly if these financial difficulties we're experiencing persist. It goes without saying that we're going to have a thorough review of it going forward. There's nothing included in this report around that particular review.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? No?
Sorry, just when might that be scheduled? So I looked at the forward plan on page 165 and I couldn't see it. So I was asking whether that was the January one or whether there was another time that was being discussed for us to have a look. And, you know, perhaps you just need to look at the forward plan, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Jane Thomas, please.
Yeah, if I can come in, I think that ongoing review of any capital commitments, any new projects that are coming through, obviously is routine, and we continue to do that. Any approvals for any changes will come through the quarterly monitoring report. So if we're suggesting any changes immediately, they would be reflected in Q3. But then the ongoing capital strategy in terms of next year and the next 5 years will be part of that new strategy for Council to consider in February. So I think it comes from various angles, really, Councillor Jake, in terms of that review.
Sorry, I'm going to just come back because I took from what Councillor David said, and I took assurance from that we probably as a cabinet would sit down and be looking at that, and not necessarily. You said it was specific, and therefore not necessarily just as part of the Q2, Q3 work that was ongoing. That we'd actually have a specific review of the projects and programme going forward, so that we can, discuss it, and identify any issues or concerns.
Well, you are doing that to some degree, particularly with the schools transformation program, which is a huge chunk of transformation spending going forward, and we've already reviewed that. But there might be a need again to review it, because we don't know, we don't know what settlement we're going to have from Welsh Government. That there are some suggestions that, as far as capital concerns, that it's going to be fairly generous. But at the moment, until we understand fully what the settlement's going to be in December, it would be a bit premature actually to actually review it at this stage. But as Jane says, it's reviewed on an ongoing basis. If the need does arise for us to look at the capital programme in totality, then yes, perhaps we will decide the best way to do that would be to come back to Cabinet and review it.
Yeah, just to say that the Chancellor's budget statement did indicate a very significant increase in capital allocation to Wales through the block, and so it probably is wise to wait and see what happens with that and how that affects our settlement.
I think it's actually £285 million more than was anticipated, whereas the proposals under the previous government were just for an increase of £1 million.
Yeah,
so it's quite significant in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just quite a step change, in fact. Okay, so I see no further hands up for people wishing to speak. So David, would you like to put the recommendation, and we'll move on?
It's just to be noted, Leader.
Just for noting, Leader.
Yeah.
We don't need a vote. No. Okay, grand. Thank you very much. Thanks all. So we move on to 7, and off finance to the STAR survey results. And we welcome the Head of Housing Services, Andy Thompson, to our midst, I think. Thank you, Andy, for being here. Would the portfolio holder, would Matthew Dorrance like to introduce this?
Yeah. Thank you, Leader. This report is for information, and the purpose is to inform Cabinet of the results of the STAR survey of the Council's housing tenants undertaken back in 2023. This is a historic report looking back, and it was delayed for a number of reasons, including a run of PERDA pre-election periods, and for it to be scrutinised by the Tenant Scrutiny Panel and the Economy, Residents and Communities Committee, which have now looked at it, and I'm grateful to both of those. The Welsh Government requires all social landlords, both local authorities and registered social landlords, to undertake a survey of tenant satisfaction every 2 years. The survey methodology used is the Housemarques STAR survey, including a number of core questions which were set by Welsh Government. This is to allow comparisons to be made between different landlords to help encourage better performance and sharing of good practice and expertise. Landlords are able to add their own questions to allow a focus on areas of local interest, and we undertook our last STAR survey in 2021, and following that a small working group was established which would include the chair of the Tenant Scrutiny Panel here in Powys to propose the survey questions that we were able to decide locally. These were then agreed by the full Tenant Scrutiny Panel, and ARP Research was appointed following a competitive tender process to undertake this STAR survey. I think the STAR survey is a really useful tool for the council, and particularly the housing service. It lets us understand where we need to improve and feel the pulse, if you like, of our tenants living in council homes across the county. Overall satisfaction has increased to 75%, which is 10% higher than it was in 2019 and 5% higher than it was in 2021. I was particularly pleased to see in this survey report that overall satisfaction with repairs and maintenance is now at 66%, which is 12% higher than it was in 2019 and 3% higher than it was in 2021. That's significant because the council took the decision to insource its repairs and maintenance service from the private sector. That partnership that we had with Kia through Heart of Wales Property Services, and it is important to note that service performance is improving in that regard. Just a couple of comments to note. Satisfaction scores have increased significantly across the board over the last 2 surveys for the council. Overall satisfaction is on par with other local authorities in Wales, and value for money for rent is particularly strong for us, and that's unusual for this to be a top key driver. There are some demographic differences between those who live in council homes, with older people being more satisfied with the services we provide compared to younger people. And there are some pockets within the local authority area where handling of antisocial behaviour presents us with an opportunity to do a deep dive and undertake some improvement report. The performance so far in this report is positive for the local authority. We can take assurance that the housing service is working effectively to support and manage the housing stock and work with our communities. But as ever with these reports, Leader, there is room for improvement and there is learning for us as an organisation, and we take that on board. I welcome this report because it enables us to do that and to refocus our efforts on what matters most to the people who live in our homes. And I'd also like to, at this point, take the opportunity to put on record my thanks to all the people who work in the housing service. They do an incredible job and they ensure that the service delivers for our tenants and contract holders, and I'm very grateful to them. Thank you.
No, thank you, John. That's a very good and fair assessment of the report. And as you, I'm sure you speak for the rest of the Cabinet in expressing your thanks to the service and its staff. Andy, the Head of Service, would you like to add anything?
I'm afraid I have nothing to add to that. I think Councillor Dorrance summed things up very well. We are looking very closely, as you said, at the areas where we're not as good as we should be. So Welshpool, for example, we were asked by ERC to take a closer look at that, and we are already looking at that area. We haven't had at the time of the survey, we didn't have an area base at the time, so we've got that. That may help. Welshpool is quite a challenging housing market. It's one of our highest demand areas with quite an ageing housing stock, so we are looking at that. One of the things that's always coming out is communication. We are desperately trying to improve that all the time. We've got a new ICT system that will kick in September, and that will make it a lot easier for people to be out and about and to communicate with people. Will be a much more up-to-date, more user-friendly scheme. We don't just rely upon the STAR survey. We have a number of programs ongoing. Our resident engagement officers monthly provide a report called Tell Us. They actually descend on an area, knock on all the doors and ask people how they're experiencing our services. That covers primarily housing, but we do feedback to other services, predominantly in the Economic Development Directorate. So we do that. Those results are published every month for the team to see. A tenant scrutiny panel also receives those, as well as our new tenant survey. We ask new tenants to the council, or anybody who moves into a new home, even if they've been a tenant, they move to a new home, how they experience that. And this autumn, for the first time, we are we are finding out, I know this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but how do people experience homelessness? Because homelessness is horrible, but what we need to do is try and lessen the pain. So what we've got research undergoing this quarter is how effective are we in doing that? So to me, it's all about quality assurance. You have to understand how people experience your services, because it's the experience they have of what we do, I think, is really critical. So there's room for improvement. We're not at the top of the tree yet, but I'd like to think we're getting there. And so it's not just about the tenants. We want to find out about the people who aren't yet tenants. How do they experience what we do? Because that's also important for the council as a whole. What we find when our officers are and about, of course, they don't see us as housing officers, they just see us as people from the council, which is actually what it should be. We're a public service, one council. So, yeah. I did say I couldn't say much, but as always, I've rambled on, haven't I? So I do apologise, Chair.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's good to hear from you. Are there any comments or questions about the survey? Personally, as leader, I found it very encouraging. I've been around as a council long enough to have seen how our council houses have been over the years, and in my opinion, they are looking in better shape than I can ever remember them. So I think that's a huge credit to the council and to those working within the service. So Councillor Sandra Davis.
Diolch yn fawr. Just to make one or two comments on the report, I find it very welcoming and to see so many improvements. And to be honest with you, this is something that I have been very much involved with quite for a number of years with tenancies and the problems and the issues that they had. And there has been a definite turnaround. So thank you for the report. It's very positive and onwards and upwards. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
John Alexander, thank you. David Selby, please.
Thank you, Leader. Just to say that there's a lot of good in this report, and emphasised by, I was out on an estate with housing managers, housing staff last week, and two things came out of that. One, the amount of investment that we are putting into our council housing. I don't mean necessarily new housing, although there was some of that, but just the repair service, which used to be something that was always being mentioned to any of us with our council housing within our it's not mentioned other than in good terms. And I also was pleased to see that the relationship between housing management staff and the tenants was good and positive. And as you say, public service is about all services, and we're probably in housing on the estates. That's where we find relationships with our residents better, because we're going out and positively talking to them. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Jake, Councillor Jake Barron, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heartening report. So well done to the team. It's not always easy to get results even on par with where you were before. You know, it's hard. A lot of hard work goes on behind the scenes with this, and it's really good. And what I was really interested, Andy, with what you were saying there was they don't see us as housing officers. They see staff there as people from the council. And one of the things that I think is difficult within the STAR survey, because of course they're set questions, but you've indicated that, you know, you're doing a lot of wraparound work here, is they are housing staff, are advocates in the community. You do assessments on how people view themselves in their house, their neighborhood, you know, this place, this work, this street that you're looking at there. And as we are adjusting the council services around sustainable powers and localities, and where people live really does matter. And I'd like to think that there might be more innovative work going forward on the strength of the relationship that housing officers clearly have with tenants and with those communities through the engagement work there, that we can actually see housing as an exemplar anchoring the council in its overall responsibilities into these estates, into these communities, do much more of this placemaking work that we talk about and we aspire to. So I think this is a really good platform to do that. You're well placed to do that, and you know, I'll be interested in conversation about how that might be achieved, because there's some great results here. The team's obviously doing a good job under difficult circumstances, well regarded, and you know, it's interesting, isn't it? People want a council house. You know, it's preferable to the private sector, comparable at least, if not better than social landlords, and you know, they are in the same game that we're in. So we've got a good product there, and you're developing that reputation, that brand for the council. I just think perhaps we can do a bit more with that across other services.
Yeah.
Yeah,
respond.
Absolutely. I think because all our estates as well, remember, are multi-tenure as well now, you know, with right to buy and, you know, shared ownership issues that might come along. Housing's out and about, and I think it is this, you know, although we've got all the things about housing revenue accounts and general funds, and there the twain shall meet and all this sort of stuff set out in law. But I do see my officers as part of the council, and, you know, and officers, I mean, everybody, the guys out repairing houses, they're ambassadors for us. So it is something, as we move forward with sustainable powers, we do need to think of the whole thing, the whole picture of what we do, because you know, we get people say, well, they haven't collected the bins. We don't say that's not our problem, we deal with it. Or they say the streets are really clean. So we go back and say to John Forsey, my counterpart, yeah, that's really cool. It is, yes, you know, and housing is where it starts for a lot of people. If you've got a home that's nice, actually a lot of other things slot into place. You know, I mean, I would say that, you're all going to say that, Andy would say that about housing, but it's true. Let's give people a good home in a nice neighbourhood. It's what we all aspire to, and it's what every human being does. You know, I remember one council I worked for, the leader once said it's what people see when they come out the garden gate, and they want to be happy to go back in the garden gate when they come home from work. And I think that's our ethos, isn't it? Surely. Sorry, I've rambled again.
Not at all. Sandra, is that an old hand or a new hand? Old hand. Matt. Matt Perry.
Yeah, very quickly, leader. It's just to commend the team. Really positive. We've seen in the news yesterday in terms of how some tenants are having to suffer in some of these private associations. So I just think it's a real credit to Andy and the team. 75% satisfaction rate. And I'm picking up on Councillor Jake's point, it is something within the place-based directorate. We're trying to put all these different services together because they just see it as the council. So Andy's teams, they're the eyes and ears out there, and then anything we can do to try and pick up any issues to do with waste recycling, street cleansing, grounds maintenance, all these things will come through. So definitely working well going forward. Cheers, thanks, Chair.
No, thank you. And actually, the truth is that good housing, whether it be in public or private sector, the availability of good quality housing is absolutely key to so many other strategies that the council is pursuing, anti-poverty, economic development, and so on. The community development, all these things run back to housing in the end, and so it's really good that we are in this position as a local authority at this time. So thank you very much. We're just asked to note the report, I think. Again, Clive, no vote required. Is that correct?
Sorry, leader.
No.
Difficulty unmuting. Yes, it's just for information.
Grant. Okay. Thank you very much, and welcome bit of good news for a change. So now we can move to item 8.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks for your attendance.
Yes.
Item 8, recommendations to the Farmer State Advisory Group. It's not in anybody's name, but I guess as a portfolio holder for the Farmer State, I better lead on this, if that's okay. We're asked to consider and accept or otherwise the Farmer State Advisory Group's recommendations, which are before us. Members have seen those. Are there any comments? Personally, I'm very comfortable with all the recommendations, but that's just me personally. Does anybody else wish to comment? Thank you, Jake. Councillor Jake Berriman.
Just quickly to say, I'm not a member of the Farm Estates working group, but the chair did allow me to attend and observe and contribute. And I would say that it was actually a really well managed and constructive meeting by all who attended, and I've got absolutely no issue with the findings that they brought forward. And I think it just shows a good area where people are coming together to help solve a problem across the chamber of the council.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think we should extend our thanks to the chair who conducted the meeting in exemplary fashion, if I may say so, having observed it. And there was a lot of views expressed, and he managed to coalesce them all into a very coherent position at the end of the meeting, and I think that was greatly to his credit. He can't be with us today, unfortunately, but I think we should put on record our thanks to him as chair. Councillor Pete Roberts, please.
Yeah, I note in the recommendations that there is a time frame that's been put forward by the group for bringing a more detailed and thorough report to us. I just wonder whether I can have some assurance that there will be enough officer support to that group to ensure that there are not unnecessary delays and we actually get to see a report comfortably within the next financial year, so that we can take decisions on it if there are decisions taken well before we get into any future budget round that may impact upon.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Matt, would you like to cover that, or Diane?
Yeah, just to say that we have got the working group. We have met with the chair last week, and we've actually going to set out clear milestones now over the next 6 months, so that we are clear in terms of what we need to achieve. So yeah, all the support that's needed is there.
Okay, thank you. Jackie Charlton, please. Councillor Jackie Charlton.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not drawing attention to it, but I just would like to be assured that this is going to take place. But there's one comment or one bullet point in the report about the concern for those most impacted by the future decisions, which are the tenants. I just wondered, is there a plan or a strategy in place to make sure that they're fully engaged and they understand and can see whether there's benefits or drawbacks to them, and can be made, it's made sure that we contact them at the earliest possible time to engage them, but also to see them as being part of the process and being part of the future of our country, our farm estate.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jackie. And just to report that I'm still responding to elected politicians on this issue, and indeed I'm approached quite frequently by tenants themselves saying what on earth's going on. So I think our communications with the tenants is absolutely crucial. Matt, would you like to?
Yeah, just again, just on that point, it's key that we keep the tenants, particularly those with the tenancies due to end. So we are communicating regularly with those now over the coming months and years.
Okay, thank you. As long as they're kept up to date. Right. Hands did go up, they've gone down again. So Councillor Sian Cox.
Apologies, everybody. I'm having to do this on my phone because of home internet signal, and I'm fumbling about a bit trying to get the screen work. I just wanted to make a brief point in connection with what Jackie said, really, which is that recommendation 4 really does offer us the opportunity to look at the way that we engage and the way that we work alongside the expertise that is available to us across our residents, including our farm tenants. And I really welcome this opportunity to look at how innovative we might be in that process that they've requested.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. A point well made. Thank you very much. Okay. We've been. I would propose from the chair, if you like, that we accept recommendations to the Farm Estate Advisory Group. Would there be a seconder for that, please? Councillor Jake Berriman has seconded. Good. Would all those in favour? So we're being asked to accept, partially accept, or reject, and so I'm suggesting we fully accept, just to be clear. Yep. Everybody happy? Okay, good. Thank you very much. That's the decision made, so we can respond to the advisory group accordingly, and to note that we will be proceeding as we are currently proceeding with our decisions on the farm estate, and that they will accord with those recommendations. That's very important to note. Thank you very much. Good. Can we move to item 9? To note the delegated decisions taken since the last meeting. Does any portfolio holder or indeed officer have a comment to make about those? No comments. Okay, all good. Jake, was that an indication you wish to speak or not? No.
Next one.
Sorry. Forward work programme, item 10. Again, any comments? Jake, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes, sorry, I was yes, just in respect of the national park proposals, I am in conversation with officers, and I may want to just have a further conversation with Cabinet at some point. But if this could be achieved through a portfolio response, then that may obviate the need for Cabinet or full council. At the moment, the type of response that I'm in discussion with affected members in the north around in this leads me to conclude that there will be agreement on the broad approach that Peter Morris, the planning officer, will put together on behalf of the council. But bearing in mind I'm not going to be here in December, that might be a way to bring that forward within the consultation period, and I'll circulate something once Peter's got that available, and see if you're happy that I send it as portfolio order on the council's behalf.
Okay, Clive, can you advise on this at all? I mean, it sounds fine to me, but I just wanted to check that it's all within the rules.
Leader, I think we need to take this away, make sure that we make the decision in the right way. It's not something that Councillor Jake and I've discussed before, so I think we just need to have the right decision at the right time.
Yeah, happy to do that, Clive. The formal consultation will be next year, Clive, not this one, but we'll have that chat. I just made it now. Cheers.
Okay, Pete, Councillor Pete Roberts.
I was just going to observe that if it were possible to bring it to the 26th of November meeting, if you're still here, Jake, just so that the public are aware of the concerns that Cabinet are expressing, so that they have an understanding, and it's not something that is just taken as a portfolio holder decision. I think it's a fundamental change, or proposed fundamental change to the management of a large part of Powys. And I think it warrants the Cabinet not just taking a decision, but be seen to take a decision.
Yeah, fair point. Okay, so let's leave a conversation to take place between the monitoring officer and portfolio holder, and we'll take it from there. If that's okay. Good. And that brings us to the end of the agenda. So thank you very much, one and all. Is there anything else, Clive, we need to deal with? No. That's it. So shake of the head. So that's it. So I will draw this meeting to a close formally. So thank you very much, one and all, for your attendance and contributions.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members.
Thanks all.